Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's 5 times 16 lanes.
Yep.
Yeah, this
And I
is not
just
a product.
I just saved you that video there. This was an April Fool's joke that this guy did. It's absolutely hysterical.
Awesome.
You should
Donald,
watch it.
This is not a product for like an i9 build. There's just
Yeah.
not enough lanes and slots.
No, you can't do this
Yeah,
on
this
some.
is
This is
a-
not a. So we'll,
This is
and
a
we'll
This is
get
a
into that.
Sapphire Rapids. This
We'll,
is a
well,
Xeon.
we'll get into that. We'll get into that. So
I mean, it
Okay.
could probably work on Cascade Lake, but we're not going to talk about Cascade Lake.
but
Yeah.
let's
We are
let's get
being
started.
tested in some workstations with a company that's based in Raleigh that we were speaking about earlier
Mm-hmm.
What's up?
with Workstation 11 Pro.
And that's probably where a lot of that's going to go.
Well, Chris is from
Raleigh
Brad,
himself.
I think you're on mute.
Yeah, Brad, you're muted.
I am muted. I am muted to y'all, and I'm sorry. I've been trying to say that stuff today. I'll say that we are now live, actually.
Oh,
Bro, well, let me.
Just so everyone can become aware of all the fun stuff. My bad. I muted myself because I took a phone call a second ago before we started.
problem.
But yes, no, and actually, so Kelly, I do have like the slides and stuff that you got to me a while back, and if something's changed from that, we can look at those differently. But I think a lot of it will still answer some of the questions that we're going to have going through this.
Yeah. I can share, and I've got slides you didn't see that will talk about data paths, so you understand how the data flows,
Awesome.
what the journey of a write is, what the journey of a read packet is, and things like that.
And we'll probably get to that here just in a few moments. So let's get it started off. So this is Don't Call Me for IT Support. We are not your typical IT guys, as you can tell, as I'm sure Kelly, as you can tell, who is our ultimately awesome special guest, and we're glad to have here with us tonight. You know, we normally just say we're just three crazy guys with a dream of helping others better navigate the crazy world of workstations. I'm Brad Medlin. We've got lovely Chris and Donald over there with us. And once again tonight, we have our special guest, Kelly Osborne. Is it Osborne or Osburn?
Burn.
Osborne from Graid Technologies. So we'll start off with a little bit of a precursor to this. So we've kind of been talking about it coming in. You know, the general gist to begin with is you know, what is NVMe in the RAID environment, and why does it work, but also why does it not work? And I love that I spelled Graid the right way in the rundown, but it did not give it to me the right way when I wanted it. But the comments that we make run back to this. So NVMe, as everybody understands, is non-volatile memory express. It's designed for the PCI Express bus, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that. Can be run over SAS or those fun SAS connectors now. And you know, it works in that just a general singular drive is way faster, as everyone knows, than a old SATA SSD, or even than, you know, the old school inexpensive, if we can laugh about that, hard drives. So why does it work? Why is it important that it works? Well, it works because as we continue our lives with data, we need that faster speed. So where do we go from there? What doesn't work about it? Well, the first thing of all, and I always like to start with this, Kelly, and then I'll let you kind of tag into it, because I know that Graid has kind of stepped it up to explain it better than I could ever go with, which is right now, if you want to maximize the throughput available to you, everyone knows what RAID is, or should, at least if they're following along with this. But if they don't, it's a redundant array of independent disks. And I loved how you prefaced the conversation we were having earlier with it used to stand for a redundant array of inexpensive disks, even though they're not anymore. And when we get into that, the things that really don't work with it is as you try to multiply up and take advantage of newer PCI Express technologies, but also different host bus adapters and things like that, you end up running into what I call the wall. One of those purposes of that walls is that you really can't do anything better than, you know, transfer rates that the transfer rate wall exists, I guess is the best way to say that. Once you get to a point, you're really not going to get much more performance out of a drive because you start to hit the CPU bottleneck, which is you can't really do much more without having either a lot more cores or a lot less disks, but higher capacity in the disks. So one of the things that I think where we're going with this conversation and where we wanted to go with it to begin with is, where does Graid come into all of this, and how do they step up and take things to the next level? And so what I want to do now is I kind of want to turn it over to you first, Kelly, and let you kind of give a preface. One, who are you? And two, how did this solution come about? Because that's something a lot of people don't really know.
Yeah, so my name is Kelly Osborne. I'm an old guy who's been in the industry forever. I'll even go back and say I got a computer science degree, and I first wrote code at a Fortune 500 company, and slowly moved over to the dark side, which is more of the computer software and hardware manufacturing and sales kind of end of the business. But it still takes quite a bit of a technical understanding to be able to sell technology like this. What I think one of the really interesting things is when you take a look at why, when Flash came out, why did we do SATA and then SAS? If you ever opened up a flash drive that's in a 2.5-inch form factor, you'll see a big empty container with a little chip in it, right?
Yep.
NAND flash isn't physically big. That was all for backward compatibility. The whole idea was I can take a drive, I can pop out a drive that I've got in a drive slot in a computer, and now I can pop this one in, and it plugs right into that same connector, and it looks like a hard drive to that computer, and it fits in that slot, right? So we've been kind of hamstrung by that to an extent, because if you take a look at the way NAND flash works, when you put a SAS and SATA kind of interface on it, you have two problems. You're funneling data down to a single serial pathway. So imagine Flash is an office building with thousands or millions of offices, and every office is what we call a cell. If I've only got one front door, which is SAS and SATA, I can't get to all those offices very quickly. And oh, by the way, if I'm on SAS and SATA, I have to do a language or protocol translation when I hit that door.
Yeah.
When we go to NVMe, it's the same NAND flash. All of a sudden, though, the circuitry in front of it allows us to plug directly into PCIe, which now that the CPUs can talk to PCIe, it doesn't have to be translated to SAS or SATA anymore. It can communicate directly. Not only that, we just opened 100 more doors on that building. So think about how many more people can go in and out to those offices if you think of people as bits, right? So that's what's happened. And that's why NVMe is so much faster, even though theoretically it's the same flash. Now there's all kinds of different enterprise levels of flash, TLC, QLC, and we don't need to go into all that. But so here's what happens in any computer. Whenever you put something really, really fast in, or replace something that was slow with something really, really fast, it now exposes the next slowest thing in the box. So if I take a bunch of NVMe drives and put them into a server class, or if I put 4 of them into a workstation and I plug them into the motherboard, I'm going to have 2 issues. One, I'm either going to have 4 individual drives. I'm going to be writing the data to those 4 drives. Now I have to manage it in my computer. If I need a much larger data set that spans all those drives, I need to stripe them together. That's called a RAID 0 stripe. But the problem now is I'm vulnerable to a single drive failure, losing all my data. If I have 5 drives in a RAID 0 set, and I lose one of those drives, I've lost everything. That means I can replace that failed drive, but I have to restore everything from scratch because nothing makes sense anymore. So back in the 90s, we came up with these algorithms that were called Reed-Solomon algorithms to calculate RAID. And so that whole redundant array idea is, let's use a mathematical calculation to say every time I write a block, I'm going to create a parity bit. And so I'm going to write a block to this disk, and write a block to this disk, and write a block to this disk, and I'm going to be striping parity bits. Now, if I lose one of those 5 drives, I can then read all the RAID parity bits off of the remaining 4 drives, and that gives me enough information to reconstitute the data and write it back to a fresh disk. And I can still be up and running while that's happening. The problem is the mathematical calculations become more and more intense as you go to RAID 5 and 6. And 6 is even more intense because it's a double parity, which means I could lose 2 drives out of 6 and things like that. That hits your CPU. So you're running RAID protection for your disks on your CPU. And the more drives you have and the higher the RAID level you want, the more CPU is being consumed at the expense of your applications and your operating system.
Yep.
So if you're a data center and you want to run an Oracle database on a server, I don't want half my CPU when I'm paying. If I'm paying based on core licenses for an application like that, I want to have all that CPU available to me, right? All those cores.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. So if you shift now and say, well, there are hardware RAID controllers, okay? The hardware RAID controllers out there, they require that you wire the drives directly to the controller. And so what you end up with there is what we call a hardware bottleneck. I've got a controller that's plugged into a PCIe slot. So I've got a PCIe Gen 4 by 16, and 16 means how many lanes. Generally, NVMe drives have 4 lanes. So if I have 8 drives with 4 lanes each connected to a card that only has 16 lanes, I'm now already funneling 32 lanes down to 4. I've already cut in half the potential throughput that I can gain from those 8 drives.
Yep.
So that's why they don't really handle more than 8. Anything more than that, you're gaining no performance because you've already hit your wall. And that's what I mean by these drives expose the weakest link, the slowest point of your system. And that's why we came about to come up with a whole new solution.
Which is smart.
So does that kind of give a good preface of what this is kind of about?
I think it does. I think one of the things that, and your description of the office building, I think starts us on a track that I think a lot of people will miss early on and not see that ability and that knowledge that could be there or should be there. I think the funny thing about it though is as you build up to this and once again, we were kind of talking about it before, is as you excel, because here's the thing that I think is a lot of it's application based too. So for example, I used to tell Chris this all the time, there isn't a computer out there that I've seen with the hardware prowess to be able to take, rated drives that I've used and actually fully maximize the bandwidth. And I think a lot of it's where you're going with this is it's because it falls into the bottleneck. Because as fast as these drives can be and as fast as the flash can be now, you end up with a software that is optimized for, X amount of bandwidth. But if it had the opportunity to utilize more, absolutely would take advantage of it. But we just don't run into the options where we have the bandwidth because, like you were mentioning earlier, IOPS get dropped, which it's the instructions per second basically, and the physical read-write access points that it can go to, and a lot of folks because of this, I think, made the play back in the mid 2010s, early late 2000s to walk away from localized storage and say, hey, we'll just throw this out on a network attached storage because guess what? We're still not going to optimize the bandwidth, but if we've got a 100 gig network card, we can at least, maybe we can saturate that. But the transfer rates inside of NVMe alone are so much faster than that. And the opportunities are so much faster than that I think a lot of people, honestly, it's kind of weird to say it this way, I think a lot of people have been looking for this kind of a solution for a long time. And so I'm going to go up here real quick and open up the, actually, you know what? If you want to share your screen, I'm going to have to optimize this, but we'll do it on the fly. So if you want to share your screen, I'm going to transition over to this and make some moves here. And where do we go here? All I got to do is this now.
I'll go full screen now so you can see how it, does that look pretty good?
That actually, shockingly, that works really well with the screen that I have available.
That works nice.
Go right ahead. Yeah. Rock on with this, Kelly.
Well, and I think, you bring up a point. A lot of people think 100 gigabits is really fast. And it is, because I come from, my first network I ever put in was a 4 megabit token ring network. I mean, so, and we went to 10, then 100, now, gigabit. So go from megabit to gigabit is just a huge leap. But when we're talking about PCI level of performance, we're not talking bits, we're talking bytes.
Yep.
So as Linus Tech Tips calls it, Gibby bytes, right? Gibbies.
Yeah.
So this is big B. And so, you know, it's something that it becomes a problem if you're looking at building machines with a large amount of disk in it. And if you want to run any kind of performance, you end up having to do something called RAID 10, because RAID 10 gets out of the way of the CPU a little bit and allows just 2 writes. So you just write to 2 disks, and it's a mirrored block, right? So that frees up the CPU from having to do quite as much parity calculation or mathematical work. But the sacrifice is you've given up half your capacity for the sake of, so it's a balancing act. And how much, you know, how much capacity do you want to give up?
Yeah.
What we're promising is the way to go with RAID 5 or 6. Give yourself 50 to 80% more usable capacity out of a RAID set, and yet no compromise in performance. And so I'll kind of run down this. We've talked a little bit about this RAID bottleneck, and the slides will help illustrate this a little bit, so I won't spend too much time on these. But essentially within this RAID bottleneck, it's this concept, once again, where we've gone from hard drives to SSDs. And don't get me wrong, hard drives still have a place. You know, I'm working with some large supercompute environments where they have petabytes of storage, and they can't afford to put that on flash, because flash is still about 7 cents a gig more, you know, versus 1 cent a gig. So hard drives are great if you just need straight out capacity, but if you need performance, you need NVMe. And so most environments are still going to be hybrid environments when you get into large systems.
Yep.
But the evolution is so fast that the existing technologies that were out there, software RAID and hardware RAID based on an ASIC-based controller, they can't keep up. They were not designed for this. And so once you get past about 8 drives, and adding any more drives is just capacity, so you're spending a lot of money on a very expensive disk and gaining no performance for it.
Yeah.
So the idea was, how do we solve this problem where software RAID's chewing up my CPU and doesn't scale? How do we solve this problem where I'm funneling all these NVMe SSDs onto one card, which only has a single connection? So I have, if you add this up, this is, you know, a Gen 4 by 4 connection is 7 gigs a second.
Yep.
Okay, so if I have 4 of those drives, I have the potential for 28 gigabytes a second, right?
Absolutely.
Well, that card's only able to do 12.
Yeah.
So if I add 4 more drives, I'm still only going 12. It's a bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
And they try to get around it by adding batteries and caching and a bunch of other things on here, which just adds latency to the pathway. So we came up with this idea. Let's take that software RAID stack that you're running on your CPU, competing with your operating system and your apps, and let's put it on a GPU. So that's the first thing. Free up that CPU. Let's process all of this RAID parity calculation on a massively parallel processing machine called a GPU. They have tons and tons of tensor and CUDA cores in here that are really, really good at doing floating point operations.
Yep.
And now my CPU is free. That's great. The other thing we wanted to do was get out of the data path. I don't want the data to flow through my card. I want the data to go from the drive straight into the application. And I'm going to show you how we do that. It's a software-defined solution on a GPU. So we kind of call it a GPU accelerated software RAID. And the way we do this, and this is kind of a server, but just think of this as a computer. You know, if this is just a workstation or whatever, I've got a CPU, and then I've got something called my root complex. This is my PCIe root complex. These drives are not connected to my card. These drives plug directly into PCIe. You'll typically find those with the M2 interface, the U.2 interface, and you're going to see some new things coming along like E1S and E3S interfaces.
Yep.
So now I've got these drives sitting here and my card up here. My card, because of the way PCIe is designed, can communicate with these drives using peer-to-peer DMA, direct memory access. I don't need to have the card connected to me to control it. I can control it across the backplane. So now, if a read comes in, I can send the read command to that drive, and the drive can send the data straight back to the application. I just got out of the way. Now that drive can go full speed back to the app, back to the OS.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the way this is implemented is I drop my card in, I load a driver on it. That's our software. And this card is nothing more than an NVIDIA GPU. We do not physically change the card. We just put our driver on it. And from that point forward, your OS thinks that's a RAID controller. We take the hard drives or the NVMe drives, and we create a RAID set, and you can do RAID 5 or RAID 6 or whatever RAID level you want. And then we present to your application 1 to 1,023 virtual disks per RAID set. And now your app would see that as the disk. When a read comes in, when a write comes in. So when a write comes to us, we process and create the RAID parity. The block gets written straight on the drive, once again, really fast. It's not going through us. And then we write the striped parity.
Understood.
So, so the real answer is we're processing here what used to be on your CPU, and we're allowing the data on these drives to go straight to the applications.
Yeah.
So we're out of the data path. That's how we've been able to hit these numbers. So I'll take a breath here and see if you have any questions at this point so far.
So I guess, here's the thing that and the way I kind of labeled this out is to kind of break it into a couple of little fun points is currently, we're talking about Gen 4. Obviously Gen 4 is being replaced rapidly with Gen 5. But to me, I sit back and kind of step back and go, it really doesn't, just looking at the layering, it doesn't really matter what generation the card is on or what generation the drive is on, because it's going to look at each drive, and because the fact of the matter is, mathematically, and I use this as the example, is that the card that you're working with is either a T1000 or an A2000. So it's not really going to it's just that the math is being done there in software,
and the commands.
And the commands are being done in software there. So it's not really like for example, if NVIDIA tomorrow came out with a Gen 5 drive, and they're not obviously, but if they did, then the difference then the way I would look at it is if they came out with this Gen 5 drive, it's really not going to affect the next upgrade path for anything, because you've already maximized everything currently, right?
Phison is actually testing us with Gen 5 drives right now on a Gen 5 server. And with Gen 5, that's going to go to 14.
Mm-hmm.
Everything doubles. A PCIe by 16 Gen 5 is 64 gigabytes a second, not 32.
Yeah.
And what you'll see is these numbers will go to 14, and it'll stay 14 because the data is not flowing through our card. It's just the command and control.
That's what I was getting at. That's exactly where I was going.
Now, what I will do is show you, interestingly enough, where there is a difference between the Gen 3 and Gen 4.
Okay.
A lot of people are buying our Gen 3 cards to use with Gen 4 environments because it's a half-wide card. The other one's a double wide, so you have a slot tax there. So when we get down there, and we in higher, larger environments, we do offer a redundancy capability where I can have 2 cards. We can handle up to 32 drives, but in this case, I would do 16 per card or 8 per card. And if one failed, this one can take over and keep you up and running until you replace this, right? So it's a active passive kind of a thing.
That's cool.
We're also working with NVMe over Fabric. I don't know if you've run across that or are much aware of that.
I have been very intrigued by what's coming there. So
there's 2 things. You can buy, let's say I have a 1U server and I need to put 24 drives in it. I don't have a way to plug 24 drives into a 1U server. What if I have an enclosure that has 24 drives in it, and then it has like a smart NIC with a DPU on it? So think of a Mellanox ConnectX 6 card.
Yep.
So basically, remember I said our cards can you communicate to the drives with DMA?
Yeah.
With this protocol, we're doing it with RDMA, remote DMA. And that's done through ROCE. ROCE is the driver standard.
Yeah.
And so what happens is these drives are sitting in an enclosure plugged into a 100 gig, 200 gig Ethernet, and then your NIC is connected to that. These drives are presented to us as if they're connected directly on PCIe. To us, these look like local disks inside the server or inside the computer. I can create a RAID set on that.
Oh,
and now you could have a box with 64 drives, and I could have 3 servers and put 20 drives in this one, 20 drives in that one, and 20 drives in that one. I have 3 RAID sets, and it's all being managed that way. That's called NVMe over Fabric.
Yeah.
The flip side of that This is the initiator side. The target side is interesting. And so think about it this way. What if this was your workstation and you had 3 drives in there with my card? I create a RAID set. I create a virtual disk. If you had SmartNICs with Rocky support, I could take that virtual disk and make it available to another server.
Holy
So now this is another workstation that's accessing this drive that's actually in your workstation. And I'm doing it with no TCP protocol. It's all Rocky, which means it's extremely fast because I'm not using chatty protocols like TCP IP. That's what Rocky does. That's what NVMe over Fabric does. So this is the target side of the equation where I'm presenting disks out as a target versus creating RAID sets as an initiator. So
it's I mean, and I'm going to break it down in a slightly different way to explain it to and see if I'm explaining this the same thought process that I have. It's like sharing a drive using the Windows environment. It's like if you have a machine that's got these things and you've got SmartNICs on both sides, and you remote into these computers all the time, but you use one like a server, so it's just got a SMB attached, basically storage drive set of drives. Rated array storage set, but it's over SMB. But you can basically treat this in the same kind of sense. I mean, it's not using SMB obviously, but you could treat it that way such that you just have a networked. Holy crap, that is.
So I can buy a box full of NVMe drives and plug it into Ethernet.
Yep.
And then I can put those drives into any computer I want.
Yep.
The problem is, you still need me to do the RAID.
Yep.
If you want disk level protection, right?
Yep.
And so you can start to think about this. What if, and so this is one way to look at this is, okay, I have a host with a Graid card in it. I'm taking these drives across the network from a JBOF. That's an enclosure that has a bunch of drives. We call it JBOF, just a bunch of flash.
Yeah.
Used to be JBOD, just a bunch of disks. So here's the thing, because we don't store anything on our card, all the configuration for this RAID set is actually stored and striped on these drives. If that computer failed, I can bring up a completely new computer with a new Graid card in it and go mount that RAID set and be back in business. Now, that's a data protection thing, but let's think of another way to do this. What if I'm a Hollywood production company and I'm in the middle of nowhere and I'm shooting on digital cameras?
Yeah.
And I have to have a huge amount of back-end storage to handle a day's worth of shoots, okay? So I write that to an enclosure that's actually a ruggedized enclosure, and Graid's handling the RAID for that and writing the data.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I take that box and disconnect it from the network, and I put it on UPS, and I send it to a post-production or SFX house where they're going to now mount that data up and start doing video editing. And then I have another one of these boxes I plug into the on-site and start recording again. So now you can start to think about how you can do workflows with this, right?
That's where the things get impressive.
Well, and start to think about some of the types of opportunities that we might be involved in aren't Hollywood videos, but maybe military intelligence, maybe capturing spectrum analytics or LiDAR analytics from mobile platforms, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of really cool use cases here for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because the fact is if if I'm in the middle of nowhere shooting in Alaska or whatever, and I just wrote 100 terabytes or 400 terabytes worth of movie film, I need it protected, number one, because if I lose this, so you want to have this duplicated and protected. But number two, there's no way I'm going to transmit that to the post-production house across a sat link.
No. Take forever.
The only way to move that data is to carry it like a giant thumb drive, right?
I mean, that's that. Yeah. We live in that environment, don't we, Donald?
Yeah.
You're not kidding.
So we kind of rat hold on this a little bit, but a lot of people, when they see these slides, well, what could you do with that? And so I'm kind of talking about some different types of, application things that we can do with this. That's pretty cool.
That's huge.
So I've got a question about the video card. Me being me, would there be any, and this might not be at the right point in the presentation, I don't know. Would there be any point in using a more powerful video card, like an A4000 or A6000? Just throwing it out there.
The answer is no, because we're not even using 100% of the cores on these GPUs.
Okay.
Now, The other answer is yes. Now here's why. Let's take a quantum leap forward and talk about the server side, where we have, if you know of the GPUs on the server side that are used for artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Yep.
They're not great for graphics. You know, an A100 is not.
No.
An A100 is a number crunching supercomputer. Basically, it's not designed for graphics. Okay. However, we're working with companies that'll have a server that literally has 10 of those. Now, these cards, you know, A100 from NVIDIA is about 10,000 a piece. So you build a server with 10 of those, you're at 100 grand just in GPUs. So here's the thing. I'm working with server manufacturers. Let's think about maybe guys in Austin or Raleigh or Palo Alto, you know, the types of guys you might think of that are testing. And they have a very big interest in running our software on one of those GPUs. Now, here's the problem. We need our own dedicated little corner. And it turns out that an A100 and the A30, which is a smaller version of that, and the new Hopper 100, which is the H100, which is even more insane, they have the ability to be hard partitioned into something called multi-instance GPUs.
Yep.
That's called a MIG. So I can take an A100 and turn it into 7 GPUs. The reason you might want to do that, if you have a server that's got 10 of these, if I want to run 70 jobs independently of each other, I can make it look like I have 70 GPUs in that server because I can do MIGs.
Yeah.
But guess what? They don't want to take an A100 out and pop in an A2000 just to do RAID, but they might give us one MIG. They might give us one MIG
To do
on that to run RAID, and then the other 6 will be running applications so that we could play there. So the answer is no, we don't need it, but the answer is yes. Some people have a interest in this because of slot tax kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
So good question. We have certified and tested on A40. We've tested A2. We've tested T4. We can run on A6000. We even have a little known version running on a T400, but it's not. It can only handle like 4 drives. So we don't even sell that. We're not even messing with that. The point is our software is very portable, and we've been able to prove that it can work in a number of environments. We have chosen to go to market right now with those 2 cards because they're fast enough for our needs and the cost and form factor is right for what we're doing. But marketing may change that someday. And in 5 years, you might see us just selling software and you go say, oh, I want to use this Intel Ponte Vecchio GPU and put the Graid software on it, and that's my RAID. No problem. That's a very big possibility. We could run on AMD GPUs. Right now, we're on NVIDIA.
It makes sense. It's a software derived solution though, but and you know I had a point in here to make this question because I think it's kind of interesting. You know, to me is this is a technology it's very new, obviously, but the question that I boil back to ask about is you know why did it take us so long to get here? I mean, you would think that, like you said, it's a mathematical equation. GPUs are great at that. No one thought back, you know, 5 years ago that this might benefit even on a redundant array of SATA SSDs. I guess is kind of where I'd go with that. Back when form factor was a thing. So yeah, I mean, like I guess like I said, the point of the question is what really took us this long to get here. I mean, it's amazing that we're here, but that's like I said. So,
well, and it's a funny point because if you take a look at this card here, which is the main hardware card that's out there, until recently, this card could only handle 4 direct wired NVMe drives. So if I had a server that had 32 drives in it, I would have to have 8 of these cards. Well, what if I don't have 8 PCIe slots? I'm kind of hosed. So now I'm stuck with, okay, let's just use software RAID. Now, if you look at the numbers here, 200,000 IOPS on a card like that, 750,000 IOPS here. I'm sorry, 21.9 thousand IOPS with software RAID. Let's show you the number difference with what we're doing.
Yeah.
With the traditional hardware RAID, even with the new cards now going twice as fast, they're getting about 7 million IOPS. Software RAID stuck at about 2. We're hitting 19. Now, this is on a server with 20 drives. On write, Let's just go with 360. We're going to be updating these slides because these new cards just came out. So the new card, the fastest they make, can handle 8 drives instead of 4, and it'll do 360K IOPS. We're doing 1.5 million. Now the streaming throughput, this is sequential read and write. This is IOs per second. So that's really database kind of stuff. This is more like I'm writing a huge file, or I'm writing a whole bunch of video simultaneously from 50 cameras or something. Let's just say, I mentioned that 13.5, a PCIe Gen 4 connection is up to 32. On the new cards, they're getting about 25. They still can't get to 32. We're already at 110. And we just made a change to our algorithm in our next release of code. We're going, and there's a press release, so this is public now. We're now able to write at 90 gigabytes a second. So we're almost getting line speed here. So one of the other things that people forget about is the whole idea of this is to protect my data, and bad things happen. And if I lose a drive, what happens if I lose a drive? I have to go through a rebuild process.
Yeah.
On the hardware side, we know that the rebuild process is 36,000 IOPS. That means it's got to read all the data from the remaining drives, recalculate the data from the striped parity, and then write it back out, and it only writes it at 18,000. We're reading at 5.5 million to 1.1 million. So give me a 15 terabyte NVMe drive, and I can rebuild that in 6 hours. Go here, you're looking at weeks. So what happens if I lose another drive during that weeks of rebuilding? How slow is my machine while this is happening? The software side, it gets even crazier. When you lose a drive and you have to go through a rebuild, this is what happens with software RAID. What happens to your CPU? You go pull up Task Manager and you're going to see it's pegged doing a rebuild. You're not going to be playing any games on that machine while that's happening. And it's going to run and run and run. So, you look at the blue here is good. That's us. So higher is better here, lower is better here, right? And sequential, same thing, 70%. 7 versus us, we're only consuming 7.4.
That's mental.
That is.
So I also want to highlight one other little thing.
Okay.
I mentioned the 1010 is the PCIe Gen 4, and you'll see 19 million IOPS, 1.5, 110, 22.
Mm-hmm.
16 million IOPS, 750, 110, 11. The test that we did with 9 that got to 90 was with this card.
Was with the SR without.
Hold up. So you're saying
with just 1,000.
It was with the PCI Gen 3 card.
The Gen 3 card, we're getting 90 gigabytes a second.
Holy shit.
On write. So here's the difference in the Gen 3. And what this is showing is when it comes to sequential, we're out of the data path with both cards. This is just the drives pushing data. We just got out of their way, right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Here, there's a little bit more work happening on the GPU. So IOPS shows better on the 4. And that has an impact on rebuild because you'll see the rebuild performance on 4 is higher than it is on 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're on a 1U server platform and you don't have but 2 slots,
yeah,
the Gen 3 is still far faster than anything else out there. So the Gen 3, and what's really interesting is when we go to Gen 5 drives, you'll see these numbers double with the same card.
Woo.
Because we're out of the way, we're out of the data path. The data is just flowing straight to the application right here. So anyway,
that's ridiculous.
So I think the cool thing is it's software and we don't change the hardware. So all of our customers who we currently have, when we release the new driver, they're going to get that 90. And they're not going to have to rewrite anything on their machine or anything. It's all going to be there. Very easy to use, plug and play. We support a ton of operating systems. VMware support's coming right now. We support most Linux distributions. We support Windows Server and also Workstation 11 Pro. And it's very easy to use. Eventually we'll have a UI. Right now it's a couple command line things that you have to do to get it running. So I want to stop here because that's kind of the overview of what this is and how it works. And I can go in deeper. I've got some other slides that show data path and stuff.
That's wow. I'm gonna stop for a second and just pause for monumental mouth openings over here. Wow, like wow. I guess the next level that and the next thing that you mentioned something earlier, and I kind of want to ping it back to see how this is going, because one of the things that Chris and I, we talk about a lot, because this is the workstation environment. It's a workstation environment that we kind of focus on. We stay kind of out of the server to a degree, and there's a lot of use cases as we could think about as we go about doing this. But I tend to think back to as the next generation of high-end desktops starts to come back with the Xeon W line that's coming out now, which is going to have a lot more use cases for you guys, I'm sure. One of the things that I kind of take a step back and look at and go, because I'm bamboozled, I guess, if you want to say it that way. But I mean, realistically, like where was this, where was this 10 years ago, honestly? But no, the thing that I kind of get at more along the lines of that is the request to speak to it, I guess, to go to it is, are you guys seeing the benefits, and how are you guys handling, because not everybody's made that transition to all flash over NVMe. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are still on SAS, obviously. Mm-hmm. Is there still a good benefit and use case to describe down the line to folks of, okay, so you haven't made the transition yet, but you could kind of start standing it up with a SAS setup or a old SATA setup where you've got 20 SATA SSDs in a 2U rack or something like that,
Yeah, you would be connecting that probably with an HBA, right, directly into your machine.
You still have to come in through some kind of host controller, obviously.
Right.
But are we seeing a benefit? That is there a benefit there now, or is this something where you'd strictly say, you know what, guys, it needs to be a part of your upgrade path, but go ahead and just consider this. This is something that's really more bound and destined for NVMe only.
It's not. We do have compatibility using a block forward technology where we can support SAS and SATA.
Okay.
But you don't get anywhere close to the performance because you're already hampering that drive. So
yeah,
remember my building kind of
you've got a bigger pipe. You've got a bigger pipe, but it's not the same pipe, obviously.
Well, and it's one pipe. I mean,
yeah,
we have people who will test our product and they don't benchmark correctly.
And
they'll call us up and say, I'm not getting any better performance. I said, well, what did you change anything?
No.
Well, what do you mean? And I said, well, so you went from a 2-lane highway to a 16-lane highway, but you're still only sending one car down the highway. So
exactly,
that car's going the same speed on 2 as it does on 16. So you have to use tools that create massive queue depth to create enough load to really make these numbers happen.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to make that one car faster. I'm just going to allow you to run 1,000 cars on those lanes and get the full speed of them. It's kind of an easy way to say it, but
that's a great example. That's a great example.
Yeah. So it's all about the load. So if your systems are sitting there waiting on disk, so in these use cases, for example, I'm doing some testing with a medical device company,
mm-hmm.
and we're talking, they make MRI machines. So you walk into the room and take all the metal out of your pocket so you don't get,
mm-hmm.
Pulled up like Magneto, right? But you get out and you go get in there and you get your MRI and it's really loud. It makes a bunch of noise and you take a Valium so you calm down and the whole 9 yards. Well, a lot of time is spent. The amount of data that thing creates is huge, and a lot of time is spent writing it to disk.
Yes.
If that medical device company using our tech, and they're big files, so that's another problem. So they're vulnerable to a disk failure. Well, if they had RAID, they could protect it, number one. Number two, if they could write it much faster, if they can do 50% more MRIs in a day, that's more people being helped.
Oh, yeah.
That's more, that's a faster return on investment for the clinic that's doing MRIs that spent $15 million on that machine. Or whatever it is, or $1.5 million on that machine. So, that's one area that that we're looking at. And the situation there is they actually know how long it takes to write that down to disk. And if we can double that speed, that's a material benefit.
Absolutely.
If we go in there and we don't make it any faster, there's a bottleneck somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right.
So we've kind of functionally moved all to Gen 4 drives now, and because the pricing is very good now on Gen 4, but depending on Gen 3, this could, well, especially the Gen 3 card,
Right.
could see a resurgence, especially for me, in the use of the Gen 3 drives just to get the cost down. Because if you're worried about overall performance while on a RAID 5, because you have to have the data protection, and you can't afford Gen 4 because of cost, then the smaller version.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of if you had 8 Gen 3 drives in your machine and did software RAID and you put our card in, it's going to go a lot faster.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it'll go fast. 8 Gen 3 drives on our card will go faster than 8 Gen 4 drives on software RAID.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is another way to kind of think about it.
Because you've taken the CPU out of the equation.
So, and this is where I mean, I wish it was still in production, because I would honestly be so curious to see how things like Optane would function in this environment too.
Oh yeah.
Something that already has an extreme IOPS read right to itself. I would almost wonder how much more of an improvement you could get with some of those drives too. Because I mean, the one thing, and I guess it's a weird way to look at it, is I wonder if there's, and maybe this is something that's down the line for you guys, and if it is, don't disclose something you can't. But the conversation that I always look at and go is the one other bottleneck that you run into is like Chris was getting at, is that the cost and expense of things. Well, we also know that the smaller the capacity of the drive, you tend to see a much lower cost per gigabyte. For some strange reason, NVMe, this is still one of the things that I've yet to quite understand it. And my example being buying a bunch of 1 terabyte drives versus 4 terabyte drives. So I'm almost wondering if you'll start to see people optimizing for an OS or a larger OS drive and running this basically. I'm wondering if there's a way, I guess, honestly, though, a way to run this directly out of BIOS even, because like VROC is a hardware supported method, but it's also, it does slow down, but you still run VROC to set up Windows. For example, you can have 2 drives in RAID 0 and run VROC and actually boot a drive using 2 drives in an OS that way, or 3 or more, so on and so forth. So the concept that I'm kind of working myself around is like, is there a because obviously one of the things that eats a bunch of IOPS is OSs. And I don't know if you've seen how bad Windows has gotten recently, but it can be rough. And maybe if there's a way to offload some of those IOPS instead of having to go direct to RAM, maybe there's a use case where you start seeing, I guess, the ability to even pull more back out of RAM, for example. And the example I always like to use is, and Donald will understand just how much I hate this concept, but it's a true statement. When you get a computer these days that has, 8 gigs of RAM, and it's absolutely slammed full, RAM is fully loaded up because it has to get things out of the drive because the drive still isn't quite fast enough from an IOPS perspective to give the OS what it needs. Maybe there's a way.
Half of it.
Yeah.
Half of it's used by antivirus software.
Exactly. Applications like that don't make sense to. I'm honestly kind of wondering, and it's a point that I made in here that, like, what other ways that things like this could come into play, where, because you already mentioned that y'all don't really hit the entire GPU of the A2000. Is there a way that the software you guys have eventually down the line could possibly benefit us in a way that would allow to, see some more processes that weren't there before from the drive perspective being offloaded to the GPU as opposed to having to cycle them through CPU cycles and RAM cycles. Because I mean, I guess the other side of that question is, are you guys hitting the GPU RAM at all, the VRAM on a GPU for anything with that?
We use the VRAM on the GPU.
Okay.
I think we've examined doing things like compression
Yeah.
and encryption
That's
because that's CPU intensive.
but very
and
math
ironically,
intensive.
one of the things to look at is take a look at there's a company called ScaleFlux.
Yep.
They make computational storage. So they make an SSD. Really, they don't make an SSD. They make a chip. It's a DPU.
Yeah. Okay.
But they're selling an SSD. So they're taking like a Kioxia or Solidigm or whatever Micron
Yep.
flash. They're building their own SSD using that flash with their DPU. Their DPU does compression
Okay.
as the data is being written. So it does two things. It speeds up the write process because it doesn't have to write as much. Secondly, it increases the usable capacity. And
Of a small
thirdly,
drive. Wow.
it increases the endurance of the drive because it's not writing as much, it's not burning the cells out as fast because it's not writing as much.
Yep.
And so that's really, really cool. So, people will look at the ScaleFlux drive and say, oh my God, the drive is really expensive. Yeah, but if you were to buy a 30 terabyte drive from this manufacturer, you're getting a 20 terabyte drive from ScaleFlux that does computational storage on it, and it's half the price of the 30 terabyte drive. So it's more expensive than all the other 15s, but you're getting the effective usable space.
Of a
So that's
30
one
terabyte.
way to think about it.
Yep.
We partner with them because guess what? They still need RAID.
Yeah.
Okay. And so as more and more drives get DPUs on them that do computational type things, it doesn't necessarily make sense for us to handle encryption and deduplication compression at the drive level if they're already doing it. So it's something we've kicked around. Another way to think of this is if we could get, if a server manufacturer really was interested in doing this and preserving slots, they could do something, they could do chip down. Now, chip down means the chip from the GPU, from the T1000, A2000, A6000, whatever, is soldered on the motherboard.
Yeah.
And they could have one soldered there on the motherboard just dedicated to us. And then they could have a bootloader coming out of BIOS that would throw us up onto that, and then we could bring everything up, right? So that's all
Okay.
theoretically possible. We're not a motherboard designer, so we know that can be done. It's more a matter of, will someone ever want to do that? And the advantage of that would be we're embedded in the machine, kind of like VRock.
Yeah.
And we're no longer dedicate, you don't have to dedicate a slot to a card.
That'd be sexy.
That would be
So-
sexy. That would. I agree, Chris. That's the sex appeal right there. That is. Well, and I mean, so and I have a final point to kind of get to with this to kind of wrap this back into the fun discussion of things. So, consumers obviously are not going to ever see this benefit currently in the current market we live in. The real reason for that is there's not enough PCI Express lanes to make it worth it. Now,
Right.
there are some discussions out there with some folks about upcoming generations starting to increase more CPU lanes to be aside for that and allow for that. And when you think about it, as we get into, Gen 5 and Gen 6 based CPUs, there may be ways down the line where we could, where you could see, okay, if you've got Gen 5 with, and I'll use the example. So like right now you have 20 lanes on a Gen 5 based consumer CPU. Well, they start to add, they move up in the next run and they go to 24. Well, the one behind that, we're almost to Gen 6, and they're now giving you a full 32 PCI Express lanes of Gen 5. So I guess the thought that I've had there, and I've been kind of pondering back and forth, is if you got to that point, is there a way to bifurcate that down? So basically say, we don't care that it's PCI Gen 5. We're going to take those lanes, because you can't, like, even right now, it sees those lanes as those lanes. It's not going to, for example, if you put an X16 graphics card in the slot, or if you put two X16 graphics cards that are PCI Gen 4, it's not going to run them as PCI Express Gen 4 cards. It's going to run them as 2x8 not PCI Express Gen 4. It's not going to run them as 2x16 cards. It's going to run them as 2x8 cards. And the card's never going to see that extra input because it's not taking advantage of Gen 5. So maybe down the line, there's a way that we can, that motherboard manufacturers and whatnot can bifurcate that down. Because that would be, there's got to be a way that people recognize and go, okay, at some point, and I guess this would be my question to you is at what point on a lower set of cards or lower set of drives do you think that it becomes financially viable to say, okay, if we've got Gen 4 being the example here, if we've got 8 Gen 5 lanes available to us and we separate that down to, we separate that down to 16 Gen 4 lanes, and now we can actually operate that there. Does this kind of technology, I guess my question would be is, at what point does something like Graid make sense? How many drives to you, in your opinion, this is not like I'm not trying to ask you confidential information, but like in your opinion, at what point do you see the adopter of this, going for it because it's the number of drives they have? Is 4 the number? Is 16 the number?
Our minimum license is 4.
Okay.
4 to 32. Now, we are going to be releasing a version in the future that'll handle 64 drives because we're getting into environments, and I could show you some interesting density plays that we're working on with like a 2U rack mount server that has 40 SSDs. Because they're using E1S form factor, so they're able to get a lot more drives because they're breaking away from the idea of a 2.5 or 3.5 inch drive bay. Bays were all about plugging in a physical hard drive. Now, with M.2s, you can plug them into the motherboard like they're DRAM sticks, right?
Yeah.
Or the E1Ss and things like that. And so we've got to be able to handle more and more and more. But 4 is where we start. And to the point about SAS SATA compatibility, the reason we have that compatibility is not to accelerate those environments per se. It's because people with multiple drive types in the same machine would like to consolidate and have one RAID, manager for all of that. So It's more of a management level thing. The ironic thing is we don't see anybody doing it. I don't see a lot of people with, SAS and SATA drives and NVMe drives mixed. I would be willing to bet that with the new, when we get past PCIe Gen 5, when you start to see 6, you'll no longer see SAS and SATA connectors on the motherboard.
I kind of think that's a true statement.
What's the point? If NVMe is simpler, right? It's actually a simpler technology in reality than ATA, which was the original, disk technology, going all the way back to parallel disks and all that kind of stuff, was a hard drive, protocol. And hard drives are basically one in, one out because they've got heads and spinning disk, and I mentioned it. That's why if you have an office building with 1,000 offices in one door, everybody lines up trying to get in the office. If you have 100 doors, a lot more people can get in and out. And that's what NVMe does. It's the same kind of flash on the back end.
Yeah.
And so we're really focused on that future, if you will. But we have customers who are buying us for 4 drives or more.
Okay.
But as you go up that chain, you get more out of it.
And I kind of think I drive myself down to this comical thing. And Chris, you had actually been the one that shared it with me before. Have you seen it's made by a company called Apex Storage, and they have or Apex, and they have these Apex Storage X21, where you can fit 21 NVMe drives on a single X16 card. And I'm sitting here going to myself, and they have this weird wonky. It's a dual card board. It's 2 cards on the same board, basically.
It's 2 cards, and they're double-sided.
Yep, and they're stuck together with an interface to tie between them, and they've got this giant chip on board to do all the handling of stuff. I'm just kind of curious, is that something that I don't know. I feel like that's something that, God Almighty, it's way too expensive.
It'll melt your workstation. You've got to have server class, jet engine airflow.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
So have you ever heard of a
Invention.
company called Liquid? Have you heard of Liquid?
Yes.
Okay.
LIQID. I used to work at Liquid, and we
Linus-
sold a product called the Honey Badger.
Yeah.
I
a
remember
full
I
that.
can't imagine
full-length-
why you would call it that.
It's a
Linus-
full length card with 8 M.2 SSDs on it, and it will do 4 million IOPS on a single card. Now here's what's
Love it.
cool. I sold those, and I partner with them now, and with our card we get 5 million off of that, because their card has no rate. It strictly shows up as 8 drives when you plug it in, because it's using a PLX
Yep.
PCI switch, and it just makes 8 drives appear on your motherboard out of that one slot.
Yep.
Well, you still have to do RAID somewhere with it, and they get 4 million IOPS with software RAID. We get 5 million with our card, and so we're working with them on quite a few opportunities. But the problem is that density of flash is super hot.
Yeah.
And Linus Tech Tips, I'm sure you guys are aware of him. He did a big
Mhm.
video about the Honey Badger, and we got millions of gamers calling us wanting to buy a 30 terabyte Honey Badger, and we're like, first off, it'll melt your gaming rig. Second off, it's $17,000. So
It's
we
a
didn't
lot of
really-
flash.
We didn't sell any. The good news is a lot of those high-end gamers work for companies, and then they ended up saying, oh, now I get it. We need to put this in servers. And then we ended up selling to their company. So
Oh yeah.
it was still a very valuable marketing exercise to do that.
And I would tell you the same thing. I think a lot of those, what are we at heart? We're all people that like to do the things that we do at work, but we also get to do these for fun on our own too. And I think a lot of that, to me, boils back to like, what's next? We never know what's next, because it's always so things have changed. I mean, just think this through to yourself. I mean, things have changed so much in 5 years.
Oh
I mean,
my God.
Literally 5 years ago, we were talking about quad cores still, and
Skylake.
the first 6-core CPUs.
Skylake.
Yeah.
Skylake.
Oh my goodness. I mean,
That thing was revolutionary.
So
well, lack of
you
competition
want-
gets us there.
if you want to peek into the future, start following CXL,
Oh yeah.
Compute
Mhm.
Express Link. So the
I'm
real last bastion here is the last proprietary bus on the motherboard is the DDR bus for RAM.
Yep.
With Compute Express Link CXL, RAM becomes part of PCIe.
Mhm.
And with PCIe 6, I'm now at the same speed as the DDR3 bus. Now I can start to share things like DRAM across fabric, like I'm doing disks and crazy stuff like that. Or I could have 4 or 5 servers sharing the same pool of memory out of a box. So let's call it just a bunch of memory box across fabric, across CXL. Now that would not be across Ethernet. You would literally have
Fiber.
a PCIe switch that you would connect multiple servers to be able to share that memory. So
But it
there's
makes
some
your
really
server
wild-
box better.
really wild things coming in that area.
Well, I
That's
mean,
kind of exciting.
and I've even seen some of the CXL ideas that they're coming out are kind of dual purpose. So you have memory in front of a drive, and that drive will basically, it gets direct access to that memory. So it really does treat, any application you have on that drive, it treats that memory like it's real memory, because it's, once again, it's close by. Yes, you're losing some latency penalties, obviously, and CXL 1.1 and whatnot. You're not quite there like we will be with CXL 2. But I mean, I keep telling myself and thinking to myself, like, that's the kind of thing. And I think CXL truly too is where that will be something in 5 years where consumers get access to it and start to see it and utilize it. And they're like, I'm no longer buying a SSD. I'm buying my memory and an SSD together, because most SSDs now have memory on them as a cache buffer anyways. So, I mean, you could see that.
I think another area to look at is something that is already available today. And NVIDIA has created a protocol they call Magnum IO, and they have a subdivision within that called GPU Direct Storage. So you remember I mentioned that what the power of PCIe and what our card is doing direct memory access.
Yep.
So we're talking to the drives, but the data doesn't have to flow through us.
Yeah.
Well, if I have a GPU, like if I'm doing a machine learning training job, okay, big, huge amounts of data. The problem that they have right now is to read the data from the disk data has to go across PCIe through the root complex, through the Intel chip, through DRAM, and then back down to the GPU. That's actually slow in terms of adding latency in the data path. So with GPU direct storage, we can tell the GPU across PCIe using DMA to read data directly from the disk. So the data goes from the disk to the GPU and bypasses the CPU. Very, very fast. And so, all of those kinds of technologies are helping eliminate bottlenecks in systems. And it's kind of fun to be playing in that market. It's a cool place to be because, I'm talking to guys like you, and sometimes I'm talking to, I've got a test going on right now in a large supercompute environment where they're testing us with BGFS, which is a parallel file system. So imagine you had 10 Linux servers with 32 NVMe drives each, and you want to make that look like one large high performance array. We're going to do the disk level protection, and then BGFS will present that as one file system.
I got you. Well, and so I'll ask you this question. Are you guys seeing more performance now? Because I feel certain you guys are at least testing some of these things with the newer generations of Sapphire Rapids and like Genoa. So I'm curious to know because that was the thing as we went through your PowerPoint there, I noticed that you were talking about it, and I'm pretty sure those were Ice Lake CPUs you guys were doing the tests on, right?
We've done, we've done some on dual Xeon. The 90 gig test we did was on an Asus motherboard with dual Xeon and 25s on drives.
So
where we got 90 gig right.
Yeah, and so what I'm kind of curious about now is the newer generation going to make any changes for you? I mean, because keep in mind you're doing that dual on 90 gig drives, but you're also doing it on dual CPU. Does a single CPU that's got 128 PCI Express lanes, is that something that is granted, you're not going to use probably 32 drives in that box, but maybe you use 16 and occupy 64 lanes. Is that the kind of thing where you might see, is there more performance potential in a single socket environment in something like that? I guess is kind of where I'm asking the question.
I think ultimately in a dual socket environment, if you architect it correctly, you have the higher potential. Generally in that environment, you're going to have two of our cards.
Yeah.
Because in a dual socket, like in an AMD world, you've got the NUMA connection and it's like a PCIe bridge.
Yeah.
And it makes sense if I can have all of the data that's on this side running and talking to applications running on. So I want to isolate the applications accessing these disks on that CPU.
Yeah, basically
I don't want one over here reading through. So, you can optimize those and get some really cool performance with two cards. So there are things like that. And I'm not sure how those PCIe motherboards are going to be scaling up, but, I think for smaller environments with 8, 16 drives, a single socket's fine.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's where I think from the perspective of the conversation that we're kind of having today, that's where I think you're gonna see a level of change, I guess is what I would say, because I think a lot more, especially since Intel recently announced and even AMD with their Threadripper line, everything is that they're kind of walking away from the workstation being dual socket. And I think there is I think one, you're the NVMe over Fabric, where you've got a host machine that's sharing that information back to somebody over, over a Fabric connection, a Connect card. That's huge. But there is still a level of localized storage that exists, just from a protected world, so you're not directly over Fabric or so on and so forth. But my thinking there is kind of might be different. And I think that like I said, their big push to go single socket and workstations, I see a lot of potential here for this, because once again, even if you've got a 56 core CPU, you don't want to tax it with software RAID if you can avoid that. And so
Yeah,
there's
if I'm running a CAD application, like Flame type application or something.
Yeah.
If I'm a car designer and I have local disk, if you've got 6 local disks in your workstation, you better have some sort of data protection, because
exactly.
first off, that's a super expensive machine. And second off, the data that you've created, the work product that you've done designing whatever it is you're designing that's on those disks is even more valuable than the machine. That's what you're being paid to do.
Yep.
And so RAID protection is extremely important. And that's why we come into play, because as these workstations get faster and as people are modeling even bigger things with desktop machine learning and desktop AI, they have huge data sets.
Yeah.
They're running into the performance bottleneck imposed by hardware and software RAID traditional controllers. And so that's opened up a market for us as well. And that's why we've got some large workstation guys, testing our stuff right now. The biggest issue we have is Windows versus Linux on the same hardware is almost a dumpster fire in comparison performance potential. And you could see it on our spec sheets. We can show you the numbers we get on Windows. The numbers we get on Windows are very respectable.
Yeah.
And they're far faster than anything else you'll get on Windows.
Absolutely.
But what we do there is expose Windows as the bottleneck. So Windows itself is the bottleneck in our case. Whereas Linux, it's more the motherboard's the bottleneck.
That makes sense. And you would always, most people would always kind of step back and see it and say it. It's, Linux is the hardware. It's the hardware dream, but then you get into, just like people used to always say that Mac was the coder's dream's Mac. But when you get into practical application in the real world, nothing runs on them still.
Right.
Your CAD packages haven't followed to them, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's kind of it is what it is. And I think a lot of the point to what you were saying there earlier is that you've got those folks that are in those application environments. Yeah, they're running things in basically they're having, you have that hot, cold, and medium storage, if you want to call it that, where you've got your hot storage of what you're physically working on. You got a medium where you're kind of moving it to back it up there, and then it goes from there to a cold storage NAS box as another backup. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like, I think this is where, personally to me, this is where the Supreme RAID card is not only making sense, but it's going to be groundbreaking, because now you can almost walk away from that medium storage altogether, because you don't need some secondary on-device storage that you're backing up to. You just need to have, you can actually go into a RAID 5 or RAID 6 array now, whereas before you were taking such a software penalty for having that, it didn't make sense. So now you've got this opportunity here where you can run RAID 6 on a 6, 8, 10 drive array with the Supreme RAID card, and then you can turn right around and go, hey, I don't need 2 or 3 large hard drives to back this up to, so that when I need to back it up again, I got a guaranteed space here. I can just run it all here and treat it almost like it's in RAID 0 storage.
Yeah. HPC, they call that scratch.
Yep.
So, and one of the other things I would say about Windows, we have VMware support upcoming.
Yes.
So a single instance of Windows is itself the bottleneck, but if you're running 10 virtual machines with Windows in each one, we're going to be able to accelerate that.
That's going to be huge.
Right. So if I can get you to run, if I free up your CPU and allow you to run 10 more VMs than you could before because of the performance I'm providing, you just got more value out of that machine you bought.
Massive.
Right. So I always like to say, we don't make your drives any faster than they already are. We just get out of the way and let them perform.
Yeah. Which is huge. So moving past Supreme RAID for just a minute, because I want to ask you some of the fun questions, because you, like I said, we like to challenge the knowledge of everyone that comes on. So it's fun. So first of all, I like to ask this question of anybody because I think it's fun. So, and you mentioned that you worked back for a coding company, worked doing coding back for a company before. What was your first experience of a personal computer that you had and used yourself? And do you remember the hardware that it had inside it?
Yep. So the first computer I ever touched and did any kind of programming on was an Apple IIe. It was in college. Thank God I was young enough that I got to do that, because if I was about 2 years younger, I would have started out on punch cards. So the Apple IIe had a Motorola 6502 chip in it. But what we did that was interesting is we ran UCSD, which is University of California, San Diego P system, instead of the Apple OS, so that we could write applications in Pascal because it was structured programming language. This is before we started doing C. Later, I learned C. And then ironically, I walk out with this great computer science degree, and my first job is writing COBOL on a mainframe. And what's even weirder, when I was in college and I did assembly language in Fortran, we had to read hex dumps because we had an IBM mainframe.
Oh, wow.
And so, debugging was reading a hex dump. When I got to this Fortune 500 company, they had a GCOS 8 machine from Honeywell. And I had to learn how to read octal dumps.
That does not sound fun.
You can test me, and I believe it was the Motorola 6502 and the Apple IIe.
I'm pretty sure that sounds correct to me. I was getting ready to say, because the 8086 wasn't even around then. So
no, I was on the PC within a year or two. I was on PCs too with IBM.
Wow, man. All right, now I'm gonna follow this one up because I want to see how Donald and Chris react to this. So, all right, transformational jumps in PC hardware. All right, so aside from the fact that Supreme Raid to me is a transformational jump, it really is. If you believe it or not, it is. But aside from that, what was the aha moment for you when you said to yourself, you know what? Everybody's going to have one of these, and everyone's going to start using these, and one day they're going to fit in our pocket.
For me, remember, I learned to program on a computer that had two 5.25 inch floppy disks.
Yep.
Hard disks started to make a difference, but I think the first machine that I worked on that had a GUI, Windows mouse paradigm interface, which was a Macintosh at the time. And then very shortly thereafter, Windows. That's what I think really opened it up to the masses, where people didn't have to learn, DOS command line stuff. Now I still Control C, Control V. I cut and paste all day long using keyboard shortcuts that go all the way back to MS DOS, right?
Yeah.
But I think for me, that was when it really changed. And because it just made it more, it made it more friendly to the masses.
All right, now, so if you can kind of comprehend who you're working with here, Donald, tell him what your first computer was that you ever used on a heavy basis.
Okay, heavy basis. The first computer that I remember using was it was an HP, but it had Windows 98 on it. But the first one that I genuinely would use and I have the most memories with was a Dell Dimension 2400 Intel. What was it? A Pentium 4.
Oh yeah.
It had 256 megabytes of RAM.
You had a lot there. You had a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot. Well, that's because I stole one of the sticks from another. They were two 128 sticks. And I stole one from another computer at work.
DDR.
Yep, good old DDR. And gosh, it was man, I had that thing. I probably used that thing up until sophomore year of high school.
So,
which for me, that would have been 2011, 2012. And I was still running on Windows XP. If it works, it works. You know,
a little bit of
If it
young
ain't broke-
bucks. A little
if
bit
it
of
ain't
young
broke,
bucks.
don't fix it.
Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, I preface this to go back to laugh at the fact that I got to mess around with MS DOS back when I was young. But when I say when I was young, like when I was 5 and 6, I love to play around with it. But so, you know, I think the next thing the next conversational piece to me to this to kind of wrap things up and put ourselves in an outro of things is, do you play games, Kelly? And if so, what games were your favorites or are your favorites from over the years? Doesn't have to be computer. It could be board too.
I mean, I always played chess and things like that. In the younger days, I dabbled with D&D a bit when I was in high school. Remember, I was a high school kid. You think about, do you guys watch Stranger Things?
Yes.
So that's like my era. I graduated from high school in 82.
Okay.
Kind of like, and of course, I live basically down the road from where they filmed all that. I know where the malls are, where they film all the scenes for that show. So
That's
in,
cool.
here in Georgia. But yeah, the first time I really got hooked was Half-Life. So Quake and Half-Life. And the first Half-Life was on the Quake engine, of course. And every major PC upgrade I made after that was when I got the next version of Half-Life. Now, unfortunately, I've been waiting for Half-Life 3 for a while.
Yeah.
Although I've heard someone's doing a mod where they're going to have a non-VR version of Alex. I'm also a Portal fanatic. I love Portal. I've played a bunch of the Battlefields or the war ones.
Modern Warfare,
Right.
Call of Duty.
Yeah, Modern Warfare and all those. I played a couple of those. I'm more of an FPS guy, although I like the puzzles.
Yep.
I played most of the Dooms.
Did you ever play?
I like playing in a dark room, and at 3 a.m, you're so immersed that for me, just the sound of the head crab in Half-Life will make the hair stand up on the back of my head. So yeah.
What a fun game that was too. I'll tell you, because it'll make you laugh. I got started on Duke Nukem, not Duke Nukem Forever, the original Duke Nukem. Wow. And Wolfenstein as well. So I mean, those were classics for me. But I think the funny thing that kind of rolls along with this is when you play those games, and I always get interested because FPSs were fun, Battlefield's great, and Donald and actually all three of us like to get into Battlefield sometimes. But what cracks me up more than anything is if you've ever seen a good run with me and Donald where we run through Civilization 6, that's a classic. That's a classic. A good real-time strategy is always going to be fun.
Well, let me date myself and tell you the first video game I ever got was when my parents bought my sister and I Pong, which was just a little, all you had was, and it was Pong, hockey, soccer, or tennis, and it was the same game because it was just a white ball going back and forth. And then, of course, back then it was all pinballs, and so when things like Galaga and Space Invaders and War Command and Missile Command, when those things all started, and Asteroids was awesome. When those things started coming out, that was great. But, when you could finally run a game of that quality on your home computer, that was a transformational moment because you didn't have to keep feeding quarters, right?
Right.
And what's cool now, you can buy those games to run at home on your computer in a pack where you get like the nostalgia pack with 100 games or something. So
if you go to Best Buy, they sell an arcade with them. I think it's even less than, I think it's only like $300, but it's got all Miss Pac-Man, all those different games, Pong, going back to that. And it's got the little joystick and 2 buttons on 2 sides, so you can even play 2-player mode. I thought that was pretty cool when I saw that the other day. And another thing that'll crack you up too is they now have a version of Pong with the little rotator paddle at Dave & Buster's for 4 people.
Oh, that's cool.
So you can there's 4 different little operations to it. Oh yeah, super irritating, I'm sure. But yeah, I actually saw that and was like, this is some nostalgia coolness right here. I didn't
right,
play
so
it
let
because I couldn't find 4 people.
let me drop one can of worms in this conversation.
Go ahead.
Are you in the PC gaming camp or the console gaming camp?
Ooh.
Both.
I would say both, but there's a reason for that. And I'll preface mine this way, and I think Chris is the same way. And Donald, you're probably in the same camp as us too. PC gaming for most things, with the exception of the stuff that Nintendo does with the Switch.
Yes. Mario Kart,
because the Switch, just the availability of, I'm not the kind of person you're going to see playing games on my phone. I can't do that. But I am the kind of person who will pack up my Switch and take it for a ride and go have some fun. I think that that's a much more fun use of my time, purely for that instance of what you're saying there. I think that's way better, a way better use.
Man, I didn't realize how dark I got in here once the sun went down. There we go.
Even with that, my Switch collects dust.
Sometimes, yeah.
I haven't touched mine in forever. I ended up buying Mario Kart finally, on my own accord. So I don't have to keep borrowing your game cartridge anymore, Brad.
Yeah, that's a fact. I mean, and I think the Switch is more of a thing because it's more of a social gaming apparatus. I'm not a big fan of playing games like that by myself, anyways.
Nintendo in general.
Oh yeah.
Mario Mart is no fun playing by yourself.
No. And playing it online is a challenge too. Although playing it with friends online is just as much fun. What about yourself? Do you find yourself more playing with consoles?
My kids have them, so I end up playing with them. I mean, I think the first big game they got in, one of my kids is into things like GoldenEye, and the other one is more into Madden sports. You know, he's the stick and ball football kind of guy. So yeah, I still do PC. I play some on my phone, but mainly card games like Texas Hold'em and stuff because my eyes aren't good enough to stare at a little screen anymore. So I play easy big things on my iPhone or whatever. So
That makes a lot of sense. I don't know what you can see of the background, but yeah, I mean, I tend to lower myself with all of the goodness that I have behind me, so that it's just from over the years things that I've acquired to get to tinker with and whatnot and build machines and mess around. And I think that's half the fun of being a PC gamer is once you get into it, you kind of break away from the mold of buying when you're truly a hardcore gamer, you break away from the mold of buying a Dell machine or something like that, and you start building your own. I think that's when you start to see those transitions. Flight Simulator was always fun. I found myself playing I got Xbox Game Pass, not because I have an Xbox, because I've never actually owned an Xbox, but because there's a lot of fun that you can have in some of those games that they have. Forza, and just all the little tinkering games like that too. So I kind of get to mess around with new games every now and then, play it that way, but not a huge gamer, obviously, but I do definitely delve into some things. And when I do, I tend to find myself on like you said, a Saturday morning at 3 a.m. going, what was that sound?
I tell you what, in the earliest days of Flight Simulator, MS Flight Simulator, there was a fairly well-known glitch. So if you picked a plane model that you were going to fly, it had a flight ceiling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could see the ground, you could play at night, and you could have the moon. The moon would be up here, right? And you would climb, and then it would hit the ceiling, and then it's like, I'm not going to climb anymore. Well, the glitch was if you inverted the plane and dove, it would climb, you could get up to like 300,000 feet because so that was kind of funny. And when you reinverted yourself, then the game would freak out because you're at 300,000 feet now and you're only supposed to be at 3,000 feet.
Oh yeah.
Because you're in a Cessna, right? So
that's awesome.
I remember those fun times when we would discover really little bugs and systems like that, and Easter eggs was always kind of cool.
We used to, and I'll tell you, you mentioned that because we used to spend every weekend. There was 4 computers in my middle school library, and all 4 of them had Microsoft Flight Simulator 95 on them. And the first 4 kids into the library, they were there You weren't going anywhere else. You'd play with the keyboard and learn. You learned how to do rudder controls and all that other stuff with the key. I was like, that hooked me. I will say this. That hooked me. But
If you can go find an original version, I'm sure there's websites that have them running in a VM.
oh yeah,
Go do what I just said. Flip the plane over and then dive, and it'll climb way past the ceiling.
I
pretty
now
funny.
I really want to try that. I think that's hilarious. That's awesome to know. I mean, there's like I said, little Easter eggs. I mean, you get to find them and you get to play with them.
For me, it was a revelation when I learned about clipping and stuff within Half-Life and all the cheat codes, and I could go do crazy fun things and stuff like that. But
Oh yeah, I still think that's kind of funny to this day. I find myself having both fun playing with friends, but hating some of the newer modern games because it's just you get some people out there that are just so competitive. And then I used to always say video games are my escape for a little while. They're not my hook. But we used to, I tell you, this is a fun story to say, and I don't think I've ever told Chris this one either. When I was probably 14, a friend of mine's dad worked for a large electrical equipment manufacturer in the area, and they were upgrading all of their computers. And he worked in the IT department, so he got all the server racks for free from the older server racks for free from this company, and built basically the ultimate gaming den in the basement of their house, where they had all of their machines networked, and it was KVM'd too. So everything was run over. You just had a keyboard and mouse in front of you and a monitor. And we get 4, 5, 6 of us, and we'd be in there playing Team Fortress and Half-Life against that, and just going to town against each other. And everyone hated it. You'd always have that one friend that would get pissed and throw the keyboard down and walk away and be like, I'm not playing with you guys anymore.
have you ever gone as far as to do any racing sims?
I've played a few, but not very well.
Have you ever been in a rig that's full motion?
Yes, those are awesome.
So there's a company about 10 minutes from where I live, and I know the owner, and he builds these. And they've got the screens that go around like that. And so and the tracks are realistic, and the thing moves because it's on hydraulics.
Yep.
And he said the biggest thing he has to have is extremely high performance. People will get sick on those, and usually it's because the visual changes faster than the rig can move.
Yeah.
So you'll see the turn before it leans a little bit, and you feel it. And that's what makes people, because they get that disorientation. And so he's always fighting the latency bug to keep that. But his customers include guys like Kevin Harvick and a bunch. He's got a bunch of NASCAR drivers. He goes to all the tracks, and they always have a tent set up where they sell these. But there are wealthy guys buying these things to put in their basement.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's got like a Recaro racing seat and a stick shift and the whole 9 yards. So it's very realistic.
See, I'd have too much fun with that.
What you reminded me earlier of, Brad, was when we were talking about, like, when you mentioned, the flight simulator in school and whatnot.
Oh yeah.
It reminded me that this was in elementary school, that someone had, they had a network-wide storage that students could access. And and upload files and whatnot, but it wasn't very sophisticated at the time. So where each person would have individual usernames, you just had one big collective folder.
Yep.
Or one big collective drive. And someone had snuck a zipped copy of Halo Combat Evolved into the network drive. So all you had to do was bring it down to the local computer you were working on, and then you could play Combat Evolved with other people that were on the computer, like in the LAN network. So you had kids at lunch, with we had like 30-man games of Combat Evolved, and that just brought back a ton of memories.
Well,
I used to work
that lasted probably about a month before IT actually
nipped that
caught
in the
up
butt.
to us. Yeah.
I used to work for a systems integrator, and back in the day, we had a T3 line to the internet, a T3 connection, which was back then was really fast.
Yep.
And so you had guys who were playing Team Fortress sitting at home on their dial-up or their, DSL connection. And they didn't know that the 10 of us were sitting in the room next to each other on a LAN on Ethernet, then going T3. So we could actually talk to each other. This is before you had headsets and you were talking to each other. We're literally talking to each other in meet space. Hey, go around the corner there. He's right there. Go get him. And they had no idea. We just destroyed people. I just forgot all about those fun days.
Those were great. I'm
sure. They're playing. It's just like what you just said. It's like ganging up like that. And
so I'm going to tell you a secret about the nuclear industry, and it's going to make you laugh. And Donald, you may know this. I think you might have had a security guard that told you this, maybe. But so we have, obviously, within the nuclear industry, one of the biggest things is security. And so we have security forces all over the site. Well, there's a big thing. I can't remember what site it was at, probably back in the late 90s, early 2000s, where they were getting upset because security guards were found sleeping on shift. And you can't do that. Like if you were in your free time or something like that, not on patrol or in an actual bunker, you couldn't do that. So they came up with a solution, which was, and this was years ago. I don't know if it's still in place today, but I mean, because this is back PS3, PS4 days, and they actually networked up because our machines couldn't go out to the outranet, but they could stay within the company's intranet. But they linked up, in all these different spaces where you had to sit and be on watch and waiting for a call or waiting for a notification about something, an alarm, for example. And these guys would have massive site to site. So basically one station would play another station in Call of Duty or in Battlefield on consoles, and they'd be sitting there, and that would be like, it would be hilarious. Some of the stories that the guys would tell me is like you'd be sitting there in 30-man teams, and everybody would have a headset that like with one ear on because you had to have one ear off to listen. But everyone would be sitting in there having with the headset talking to the rest of the site, going, "All right, guys, we got to go to this place or this place or this place. You got to jump around and get this guy here. You got to go that way there." And huge. Because think back then it was only 16-man games, but you'd play site to site like that, and it'd just be, they'd have competitions for which site was the best, and hand out awards at the end of the year across the site for the security forces. And I was like, how do you sign me up for that job? That would be awesome.
Fun.
So
that's cool.
And it was all in the ploy of, we don't want you guys to have to feel tired or be asleep. So if you got to stay awake, here's a way to do it. Keep you from having to watch Netflix or doing whatever. We'll hook you up with this. And that was the coolest story I think I ever heard of my early career working in the nuclear industry, was that there were sites that would play other sites physically in Call of Duty for prizes, basically.
That's fun.
Yeah. But we'll start to wrap up. Your last thoughts to everything. Basically, one, Kelly, thank you for being on. We really appreciate the presentation. I know myself, I learned some more once again about a technology that is, to me, in my opinion, going to be very instrumental in changing the way organizations start to utilize this newer NVMe based storage. And so I think that's one. Two, always a pleasure. You're welcome back anytime. We tend to delve into a lot of other conversations too. Storage has been one of the big ones recently because there's been a lot of change there and a lot coming. But Chris, Donald, do you guys have anything else you want to say? Any points you want to make conversationally?
I guess the only question I have left for Kelly, you mentioned that your licensing for your software goes up to 32.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming there's a different like pricing based on how many drives you end up using in your array. Okay,
that
was pretty much it.
Yeah, so 32 is the max. Eventually that'll go to 64, but we do a 4, 8, 12, 32 license.
Nice. And I'll follow up to that. Is that a permanent license or semi-annual license?
It's permanent.
Yeah. See, there we go.
Okay.
That's the best side of that, because people want to know that too.
Today it is.
Hey, everything's an option to change, obviously.
Hey, I just heard a new one, like these Samsung, I watch competitor things.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Mhm.
offering people a free Samsung watch now, but you got to sign up for their subscription,
Of course.
and it's $180 a year, and then
It's like-
next year it'll probably be 300. Everything is subscription.
It's like BMW asking you to pay for heated seats now.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Subscriptions.
what they want to do is they want to simplify manufacturing. So if they can make every car identical and just turn on the features you want with software.
Welcome to Intel, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I
guess
say
it's time for me to go buy an old, carbureted car with a 5-speed and just enjoy it. That can't be turned off with a switch from a satellite, right?
Can't drive itself back to the dealership.
You can't hack my car.
yeah,
So
yeah.
hey, I appreciate the opportunity. It's fun. I love talking about this technology and technology in general. We covered a lot of different areas today. So,
Mm-hmm.
For the right application, this is a really good thing. And I mean, the workstation space is growing, and it's going to be a more important part of our business. I mean, obviously, we kind of start at a certain level and then go up from there. And always a pleasure to be able to show people what we do, and it's fun to have people excited about it, because I only sell technology that I'm excited about. I've never gone to work for a company that I didn't have a passion for what we did and believe in it.
That's awesome.
Because I think that's the only way to do it, right? If I left my company and went to a competitor and said, "Oh, they suck and this is better," when last week I was trashing it, it's my personal credibility just went down the drain. So
Absolutely.
I've never done that in my career. So, but I do appreciate the time tonight, and you guys have a great weekend.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you guys. We'll end the stream with this. We are not your typical IT guys. Find the link in the description and check us out on some other stuff as well, and check out some of the other videos. But until next time, I'm Brad.
Chris.
I'm Donald.
And thank you, Kelly, for joining us. Have a great one.
That's Kelly.